These 10 books changed my life in one specific way. They made me more optimistic. And I think the world could use more optimism right now.
It shows local businesses are feeling more anxious than they have in 2 years. It is day 11 of the U.S.-Israel war with Iran.
More and more young people say the health of our planet is causing deep concern about their futures.
Which is why I think you should read at least some of these 10 books. And this book in particular is, I think, one that everyone should read. Let's get started. The first book out of 10 is The Power Broker, right here. Look at this book. This is a thick boy. I think it's 1,300 pages. This was written by Robert Caro and was my introduction to Caro, whom I love now. And The Power Broker is great because it talks about a guy named Robert Moses, who was effectively a civil planner in New York in the 20th century, but he was arguably one of the most important people in New York at the time. He built many of the bridges and tunnels that you may have seen today if you live or visit the area. Robert Caro does a deep research project on who Moses was, how he acquired his power, how he was able to maintain the power through multiple administrations of mayors, and the good and the bad that came from decisions that Robert Moses took. Let me read you one quick paragraph from the beginning of the book. Robert Caro says, and I quote, "In terms of personal conception and completion, no other public official in the history of the United States built public works costing an amount even close to that figure. This was $27 billion in 1968. In those terms, Robert Moses was unquestionably America's most prolific physical creator. He was America's greatest builder." Caro went on to write the Lyndon Johnson books, which are also fantastic. I like them even more than the Power Broker. This book is kind of well known in political circles. If you look at political pundits on TV, they almost always have it behind them. But nonetheless, I think it's a fantastic book to understand power in local politics, how it can affect our lives around us. And from an optimistic perspective, it can also help us see how things actually get changed at a local level. Who are the key people, which are often people you may not even know by name. They may not be the top level person like the president or the prime minister. And this grounds you in understanding the political element of your world rather than just look at random news articles. Someone did this, someone did that. This is good, this is bad. The next book is Dominion. This is by Tom Holland. He writes about the history of Christianity and how it has influenced the Western world in particular. And I grew up Catholic, though I no longer go to church. I wouldn't identify as a Christian. But this book was incredible because it showed me that Christianity and religion isn't just something you do once per week. It has played a significant role in the development of certain parts of the world, and things that you may assume are sort of random, you then start to see the connection back into religion. We can think, for example, our concept of time. We might say that the year is 2026, but we're really referencing 2026 years after the birth of Jesus Christ, give or take, the AD BC, which today is not as common. Today you hear more about the Common Era and before Common Era and Common Era, but again, those are just different labels for what has historically been the AD and BC. So our concept of time is actually wrapped around Christianity, but we also see Christianity in other elements, the rise of human rights, which were built around the idea that we were all equal under one God. We see many of the key scientific figures during the Enlightenment period, people like Newton, who were quite devoted Christians. And part of their drive to figure out what we might now call scientific laws was really a way to understand how God had designed the world and what were the natural laws that God had implemented. Today, we may see science and religion completely different, but to them, it was actually intertwined. I don't like the negative perception of religion. It is not perfect. It has flaws, but books like this start to give you a more nuanced take as to how something like religion, specifically Christianity, influences the development of events, key people, and plays a key role, both for good and for bad, in history. I think for our optimistic mission here, it's helpful to know that the ideas don't just appear randomly. The idea of human rights doesn't just appear one day. It's actually built on different elements over time. And if we can understand those elements, we can have a deeper understanding as to how ideas came to be, why they appear at a specific point in time and not a previous point in time. And if we want to look at Western history in particular, there's no way to avoid the influence of Christianity. The next book is World War Z. This is a fiction book, so I actually like to read nonfiction and fiction, though I typically listen to fiction books on audiobook. But World War Z is a great book. I actually think the audiobook is even better. The original audiobook of World War Z, I think, had something like 10 or 15 narrators. And after the movie came out with Brad Pitt, the updated audiobook has something like 40 narrators. So the experience you get from an audiobook perspective is top notch. I think if you don't like audiobooks and you've been meaning to try and find one that's good, World War Z is, I think, a great start. Just the quality, the multiple narrators really makes the story much more immersive. Now, the movie is okay. You can check it out. It's actually quite different from the book. But fiction is sometimes underrated. For me, there was a big portion of my life where I read exclusively nonfiction. And over time, I started to listen and read much more fiction. And sometimes it's really hard to understand certain concepts or to really envision a specific period in time until you read it in a fiction book, which can do a much better job at painting that picture in details that are easier to digest. So I would not skip fiction. I would just simply try to look for fiction books that you find appealing, that you find enjoyable. And there's a lot of genres out there, a lot of different types of books, whether you read them in physical form or you listen to the audiobooks, whatever makes the most sense for you. From the optimistic take, World War Z is kind of interesting because the book shows that humanity struggles to deal with the zombie apocalypse and that different countries try to come together. They don't really cooperate, but eventually they succeed. I think there's something about that story where, yes, maybe initially this onslaught, effectively it's a pandemic that turns people into zombies. It's hard to deal with and humans may not cooperate perfectly, but eventually they do come together, they find solutions, and they build a better world. The next book is Boys Among Men. I read this book when I was in my early 20s. It's about basketball. I love basketball. I was actually recently at a Portland Trailblazers Clippers game with my dad. And this book, for some reason, gave me this work ethic idea. It basically looks at superstars like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, the players who jumped straight from high school to the NBA directly. Today, that's no longer possible. Players typically have to do at least 1 year at college or somewhere else. But before that rule was implemented, there were many players who were going straight from high school to the NBA. And the book looks at how difficult that was. You got to imagine for many of these high school players, they were historically the best players in elementary school, middle school, high school. And then they get to the NBA and they are no longer the best player. In fact, they're not really that good compared to the professional NBA players that have been in the league for many years. So they go from winning all the time, their entire life basically, to losing all the time. And naturally, for some of the players who were very young, you can imagine they're 17, 18, this is a very hard psychological and emotional transition. And they are going against NBA players who are much older, 25, 30. But not only that, for some of the older NBA players, this is their job, this is their profession. So they're not here to help young players develop. If you want to be in the NBA, you have to earn it. So the stories were both good. Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, who eventually make it and become very successful players. But there's other players that completely flame out. They do not last in the NBA. They have psychological problems. They may encounter drug problems. So there was something about this work ethic idea that arose from reading this book about these young players that came towards the right time. I have read other NBA books over the years, and most are actually not that good. This is actually a very good book. For our optimistic mission, I really think there's something about perseverance, persistence, being able to put in the work on a regular basis, knowing that over the long term, you can become better, you can become adaptable, you can figure it out. The next book is The Architect's Apprentice by Elif Shafak. Elif Shafak is a Turkish writer, I believe. So this book is based in Istanbul. It is fiction. It might actually be described as historical fiction to some extent. It takes certain elements that did exist in history. And Elif Shafak is a fantastic writer. I find her writing to be quite beautiful. Some of the wording and phrasing that she has in her book. Let me read you something specifically. The book is about a young boy who takes care of an elephant. He is the apprentice to an architect, and they are responsible for building some of the most impressive buildings or constructions in Istanbul at this point in time. I want to say this is sometime in the 1400s, 1500s, just to give you a sense. So the name of the protagonist is called Jahan. And at one point in the book, they actually go to visit Michelangelo. So Jahan gets to Rome, and he's actually looking at a specific building, which you may have seen in pictures. So I read, quote, Jahan thought that there were two main types of temple built by humankind. Those that aspired to reach out to the skies and those that wish to bring the skies closer down to the ground. On one occasion, there was a third kind, those that did both. Such was San Pietro. As he stood there watching, completing the structure in his mind's eyes, he had the strange sense that here too was the center of the universe. So Johann is looking at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and the book is a great story, to be honest. I think I've read this book. I don't know if this book is an audiobook, but again, Elif Shafak is just able to weave in such great details from a different culture. And like many other books here, the story is optimistic. It is looking at how buildings are constructed in Istanbul, what it means to construct those buildings, what they symbolize to the people, and the effort that goes into making these ideas a reality. Our next book is a bit of a cheating on my part. This book is called Caesar and Christ by Will Durant. It's actually part of 11 books, which are titled The Story of Civilization. The books are primarily focused on Western civilization, though they do cover a little bit some other elements. And Will and his wife, Ariel, they researched and wrote these 11 volumes over 40 years. I believe 1935 to 1975. And I have all the 11 volumes here in my house. I read them all actually as my first reading project ever. I think I read them over a year. And the Durants do a fantastic job at capturing the key elements of history throughout their 11 books. This book in particular is focused on the days of Caesar and Christ, so you can kind of put yourself in that period in time. These books, as a reading project, were amazing. I think even though I took history classes in high school and college, there was something about reading this somewhat complete Western history and seeing how all the different elements come together. How did we go from Sumeria to something else, and then from Greece to Rome, and then from Rome to that? How did agriculture come to be? What were the political elements across multiple cultures? Patterns in music and poetry? How did cultures develop? On and on. You can see this book alone is, I think, about 700 pages, and every book is about the same size. I think some books are a little bit bigger. So it is quite the task to be able to read all the 11 volumes. I think it's quite worth it. And maybe you read them over a few years. Maybe you kind of go back and forth on the time periods depending on what you're interested in. I think for our optimistic mission, there's nothing better than this deep dives into history, into seeing what came before us. Sometimes the elements happen in the modern world and we think this is unprecedented. But there's very few things that are truly unprecedented. There's so much similarity in previous events, and we can look at those events to understand how the events around us today can play out. What are the good? What's the bad? What's the potential? So being able to go through books like this, understand them, enjoy them, I think is fantastic. Now, Durant are also really good at writing this kind of like poetic type phrasing and structure. And it's actually throughout the entire book. There were many cases as I was reading this book where I would read a paragraph and I would pause and be like, wow, that's like, there's something about the way he structured this idea that is enticing, that makes you do a double take. Let me read just one of many examples in this one book out of 11. I read, quote, in Christ and Peter, Christianity was Jewish. In Paul, it became half Greek. In Catholicism, it became half Roman. In Protestantism, the Judaic element and the emphasis were restored. Highly recommend you check out those books. You may actually be able to find the physical books somewhere. I think I bought them online, Amazon, I want to say. But there's probably digital copies, perhaps, that exist out there. But anyway, the 11 volumes from the Durants are fantastic. Our next book is The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. Josh Waitzkin is considered a chess prodigy. He started playing chess when he was just a young kid. He was considered to be quite good. There's actually a movie that was made about him called Searching for Bobby Fischer, which I believe is based on a book of the same name. And I love to learn new things, whether that is things from many books or physical things like sports and things like that. And there's something about this book that just captures my imagination. Josh Waitzkin tries to distill his process for how he approaches learning. It's sometimes a bit esoteric, if I'm being honest. This is not quite a self-help book that's trying to give you this very structured approach to learning. It's much more about story and philosophy and principles. But nonetheless, this is, I think, one of those books that I have reread maybe 10, 15 times. I have listened to the audiobook a few times as well. So there's something about this book that I keep coming back to and that you may enjoy as well. I do think that, again, for our optimistic mission, learning is crucial. The ability to learn, to adapt can mean that we can figure it out, that we can approach and find a way forward because we can learn new approaches. Our next book is 11/22/63. My God, I love this book. This is fiction by Stephen King. I will be the first to say that I do not typically read Stephen King books. I do not like horror or scary books, so I do not read them. I think I read it many years ago. I watched the movies. I didn't really enjoy them. Fun fact, I actually once watched a trailer for a scary movie and I had nightmares that night just from the trailer, not even the actual movie. So Stephen King is not at the top of my list when I'm looking for new books. But I came across 11/22/63, and I think it's a fantastic book. Effectively, a guy finds a time hole, a door that takes him to the past from 2011 to 1957, and he's able to go to the past and walk around the past, all that kind of stuff. But he decides that he's going to use this time travel door to stop the JFK assassination. That is the Kennedy assassination that took place in 1963. And the title of the book, 11/22/63, is actually the date when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. I think it's November 22, 1963. So he wants to go back in time and stop it because he believes that if he can stop the John F. Kennedy assassination, then the world would be much better. And there's all this like logic that's being put forth in the book for why this is the case. So that's kind of really the synopsis for the book. I will say though, if that kind of turns you off because you're maybe not so much into politics, this book is not about politics. I know it may be hard to believe that, being that the entire central plot revolves around JFK, but it's really not about politics. It's really about time travel. It's really a love story. And this is the kind of, I think, fiction book that if you don't like fiction and if you weren't enticed by World War Z because you don't like Zombies either or The Architect's Apprentice, maybe this is the book that you give a shot to. I listened to the audiobook of this book. You can see it's a very thick book. Look at that. Another thick boy here. Let me see. This is almost 900 pages. So a little bit shorter than The Power Broker. But honestly, this book does not, I don't know what else to say to tell you that this book is amazing. I remember when I finished the audiobook, I was actually in my car and it took about 20 minutes to finish the last little bit I had left in the audiobook. And then I had to sit in the car for another 20 minutes just to process the end and just to be like, wow, I can't believe I just finished this audiobook. And the audiobook is 30 hours, by the way. It is a long audiobook. I can't believe I am done with this audiobook. It was incredible. A few days later, I played the TV show. This is a show on Hulu, which I think has the same name, 11/22/63, with James Franco as the main character. I put on the first episode. I watched about 5 minutes, and then I realized that they made several changes to the story structure to make it flow for TV. And then I turned off the episode. I can't watch this TV show because the book is so perfect in my mind that I don't want any other image out there for what the characters look like, how the story is supposed to go. Something else about Stephen King, he is a prolific writer. He will write multiple books per year and novellas and a bunch of stuff. And he's really not the kind of writer that you would consider very heavy on research. Unlike, let's say, Robert Caro, which he will spend 40 years writing 5 books on Lyndon Johnson and going through this mountain of research. That's really not Stephen King. They're really polar opposites. And Stephen King actually had the idea for his book for a long time, and he hesitated because he knew it would require research. And he just didn't know if he was capable of doing that. But he came through. I think he visited Dallas. He did do research. Most likely not the Robert Caro type research, but he did do a lot of research for this book. And for our optimistic mission, there's something about this book. Sometimes we may think, man, if you just go back in time and just fix this one thing, then life today would be so much better. I think the book makes a good argument that things are not always so simple. Even if he had this ability to time travel, going back in time is not always really the best idea. Sometimes it's really just about how do you move forward? How do you accept what's going on right now and figure out how to build a better future going forward? Our next book is 1491. This book is by Charles Mann. A very interesting book. He effectively looks at the year when Columbus landed in the Americas, which is 1491. I believe he landed in what today is modern-day Bahamas. And then he went on to modern-day Cuba and then eventually to other parts of the Americas. And Columbus was followed by many other ships, eventually the French and the English and the Portuguese and so on. But Charles Mann went ahead when he wrote this book in, I want to say 2012, early 2010s. He looked at the latest research for what the Americas looked like before Columbus. And he does a great job at dispelling many of the myths that we may be accustomed to. I saw the story of Columbus coming to America during high school, but there were many facts in this book where I was like, wow, that's not what I learned in school at all. Just primarily because the research has changed over time. So some of the amazing facts that the Charles Mann is able to put out in the book, we can see, for example, that the Americas had a larger population than Europe at that point in time. Some of the cities in the Americas, for example, some of the cities in the Aztec Empire or the Inca Empire were actually more sophisticated than the European cities. That is, they had running water and they had shelter and they had other elements that just actually did not exist in Europe at the time. He's able to have even more evidence for the impact of disease, the diseases that were brought over by Europeans, which then had a large negative effect on the local population here in the Americas. It's able to underscore how Columbus coming to America opened up this global chain of products across the world. And there were some things, for example, like potatoes, which were taken from Peru and then became a key staple in Ireland, or tomatoes, which came from the Americas and became a big staple in like Italian cuisine. And I think this is one of those books that completely updates your viewpoint on something that you may feel pretty confident. You may be like, hey, I know the story of Columbus coming to America, what happened next, and so on. And then you read this book and you're like, I only knew partial of that story. There were elements I didn't fully understand. There's research that has now come to light since whenever you learn that story that now updates your viewpoint and your perspective on this specific event. Charles Mann actually then wrote a second book called 1493, which then looks at the world 2 years after Columbus arrived in America and the repercussions and the consequences, both in the Americas and in Europe, from the what they may call it the discovery of the land, but when they stumble upon the Americas and what that meant for world history up to a point. It's definitely an interesting point in time. Roughly around this time, we start to see the development of big empires like the Spanish Empire, the British Empire. So there are a lot of key historical events that are tied to Columbus arriving in America and the extraction of resources, the discovery of certain products that didn't exist before, and so forth. And I think for our optimistic mission, being able to look at the past in an objective point of view, using the latest data and facts can help us better understand the present. Sometimes we see this question about diseases. We know that the Europeans brought diseases over, that the locals in the Americas had no immunity, like chickenpox or smallpox, and it was disastrous. But we also get to learn that the concept of how diseases spread was really not that well known back then. So the Europeans were not consciously bringing diseases over. It was something that just happened as a byproduct from crossing the ocean and going to a new land. So there is some empathy that can be constructed by understanding that this event that we see today, and we like, how can they not know? Don't they know that diseases spread and you need vaccines and that kind of stuff? But that's a modern take. At this point in time, this is not the way the world understands this one specific element. And it's only through books like this that you can develop that more nuanced perspective on something that we may take for granted today. Our last book, and the book that I think everyone should read, is Factfulness. I think this book represents everything that I want to do in this YouTube channel, in this video. Factfulness, 10 reasons why we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. Written by Hans Rosling with actually the help of his son, Ola, and his daughter-in-law, Anna. So the three of them, they have a small team behind them actually put together this book. Hans Rosling, if you don't know him, you can actually go online here on YouTube. Actually, you can watch the many talks that he gave throughout his life. He actually passed away, I believe, a year before this book was published. This is actually one of the final things that he did. And the core premise of Factfulness, and really the life work that Hans Rosling dedicated himself to for the last maybe 20 years of his life, is that he realized that people, you and I, people in general, didn't really understand what was going on from a global perspective. We thought that we knew. Yeah, and he actually put together 13 questions that he used to ask to audiences all over the world. Let me actually read you one of the questions and see how you would answer it. This is question number 3 out of 13. Quote, in the last 20 years, the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty has, this is a multiple choice, option A, almost doubled, option B, remained more or less the same, option C, almost half. Think about your answer. Is it A, double, B, remain the same, or C, cut in half? The correct answer is C. The number of extreme poverty has almost half in the last 20 years. Even when we look at the data from COVID, where there were small increases, that trend still continues on today. And there's 12 other questions similar to this around the literacy rate, how many children have access to vaccines today, climate change. And he realized when he put these questions out to different audiences that the vast majority of people out there were doing really badly on these questions. In fact, he used to have this example with chimpanzees, where he's like, hey, if I take these 13 questions to chimpanzees and I sort of train them to choose A, B, C, the chimpanzees are going to choose at random because they're just choosing randomly. And he realized that many of the audiences were doing worse than the chimpanzees. That is, if you go through the 13 questions and you choose random answers, you might do better than if you try to honestly answer the questions based on what you think is the correct answer. And he was flabbergasted by this. He was like, how is it possible that educated audiences all over the world, different countries, the US, Europe, Asia, Africa, and even when he used to go to audiences like the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, even those audiences would not perform that well on the questions. So in the book, he tries to put together what he thinks are the fallacies that get in the way of that. For example, we may only see news stories about a certain region. Think like Africa. And we may think, oh yeah, well, here's Africa. We're seeing war. We're seeing poverty. We're seeing this. So we assume that this is what the entire continent is looking like, but that's not the case. Or we may see a trend and we may say, hey, like this trend of income inequality is going to continue, but that's not the case. So there's all these misunderstandings around the world that we all have, that I had. When I read this book, page after page, I'm like, that's not true. Come on, that's not possible. There's actually a page in here where it shows different charts of all the bad things that are decreasing. And you read this page, I'm like, come on, this is not true. You look at oil spills, less common today than in the past. The cost of solar panels have rapidly decreased, especially in the last 5 years too, but this is even from the last 30 years. The percentage of children that die today before their 5th birthday is at 4% today, which is actually about 4 or 5 million, which is a lot of children. But just about 120 years ago, 130 years ago, that number was 44%. The number of deaths in plane has plummeted, on and on and on. If I could build one thing from this 10 books, you want to read one book, Factfulness is that book. And what I like about Hans is that Hans actually didn't consider himself an optimist. He considered himself a possibilist. And he said, quote, a possibilist is someone who neither hopes without reason nor fears without reason, someone who constantly resists the over-dramatic worldview. I think this is very important for Hans. We do live in a world right now that sometimes feels overly dramatic. I look at the AI thing right now, and I work at technology. Even when I think, hey, like AI, cool technology, there's going to be some cool use cases. But sometimes the perspective of AI is either like, oh my God, AI is going to kill us all. It's going to take half the jobs. It's going to eventually lead to some kind of Terminator robot and kill us. And you're like, wait, what? Why can't we just see this technology as cool? Some use cases, it will be good in some places. It will be terrible in others. Let's just move on. No, it has to be overly dramatic. And you tell people, it's like, hey, that's a pretty dramatic point of view. And they're like, no, it's not dramatic at all. Actually, I think it's pretty sensible. So Hans hated this overly dramatic view. And we see this overly dramatic view everywhere. Some topics are even so difficult now to discuss because you just cannot get over this overly dramatic view. So he believed a possibilist is someone who sees all the progress we have made in a specific area, and that progress fills you with conviction that you can continue to make progress. I think climate change is similar to this. Sometimes we may get this impression that, hey, like we are doomed, we're all going to die from climate change. But if you look at the progress, especially over the last 10 years, we're saying from like 2016 to 2026, there's amazing progress taking place right now. The cost of solar panels, the cost of wind energy, the amount of electricity that's being turned on and provided every day in new countries, the drop in emissions, on and on and on. And among all that, we can still find challenges. We don't know what to do with the carbon emissions already in the atmosphere. We don't know how to decarbonize the travel industry like airplanes. There's a lot of things we don't know, but there's also a lot of progress we have made. So a possibilist, what this book is trying to make you believe in is that you can accept, you can celebrate the progress while also working towards improving the future and tackling what still remains to be done. So factfulness, to me, is a book that everyone should read. It completely supports this optimistic mission that we have. And I wish everyone read this book. Because honestly, once you read this book and you understand that things are actually much better than you think, that there's actually a lot of hope, a lot of progress that you can look towards in any given area, life actually becomes a little bit more enjoyable. You can actually relax a little bit. You don't have to go through life with this heaviness that I sometimes meet people. We're like, oh man, like everything sucks. Everything is terrible. The world's collapsing. I'm like, the world's not collapsing, man. Like the world's actually doing well in a lot of respects. And there are challenges. I'm not here to dismiss those. I'm not here to tell you that nothing is wrong. But you can also not say that everything sucks. There's so many things that are good out in the world. And factfulness will show you how. Not just through stories and philosophy. Hans believe in using statistics. He shows you the progress. He explains why. For example, if we go from 44% children dying before their 5th birthday to 4, what happened? What was actually that progress? Where did it occur? Where is it going to occur in the next 50 years? I wish Hans was still alive. I wish he would continue writing books. He would continue giving talks. Unfortunately, he died from pancreatic cancer, but he left us his book. And I think that there is a job for us to do to read the book, share it with others, and help them understand that the world is actually really quite amazing once you start looking at it in the right lens. Those are my 10 books that changed my life and that made me more optimistic. I hope at least some of them sound interesting to you. And you're right now either going to your bookstore, going online, or wherever you get your books and trying to see how you find any of these books and read them, because the world needs more optimism. Or if we use the words from Hans specifically, we need more possibilists. And that can start with you reading some of these books. One more thing before you go. Look at this book here. This is the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's actually a very beautiful book that I bought, I think mostly because of how it looks. I'll be honest with you though. I've tried to read this book multiple times over the years, and I just cannot get through it. I read a few pages and then I stop. This doesn't mean this is a bad book. Some people out there love this book. You may think this is one of the best books out there ever written, and you may have actually a good argument for that. But it's not my kind of book. I don't really enjoy it. Maybe when I'm older, I'll enjoy it. Maybe some of you will share some ideas on how to properly read this book, and then I'll enjoy it. But for the moment, it's okay. It will sit on my bookshelf, and maybe I'll come back to it. I think that's an important lesson here. As you read books, whether any of these 10 or any other books, read the books that you enjoy. Focus first on enjoyment, on making reading fun. And if you're not enjoying books, you can actually put them down for the moment and come back to them when they feel more enjoyable. Until next time, my name is Ruben, and I'll see you soon.